Hey guys, it's Hannah and welcome back to another video. We are officially through January and it was a really good month for me in terms of reading. I read a ton of books this month. I ended up reading 9 books in total, which seems like a lot considering one book was over 600 pages. And a lot of the books that I read this month were a little bit like dark and sad, and I read quite a few thrillers this month as well, so I'm hoping that next month in February I start to lighten things a little bit more, maybe pick up a few more romance. But today's video is all about what I have read in January. That's right, today is a January reading wrap up, and I'm really excited to share with you guys the books that I read and kind of my thoughts and reviews on each of the ones that I've finished this month. So let's start at the very beginning. The first book that I finished this month is How to Find Love in a Bookshop by Veronica Henry. This is more of a literary fiction style book. It is following multiple POVs in multiple timelines set in England. We're following a main character, Emilia, and she takes ownership over her father's bookstore. The bookstore is failing and she doesn't really know what to do at this point. She, tries to get help from different people, and the community does end up surrounding her and helping her kind of get through this difficult time. I didn't particularly like this book very much. I didn't feel like the villain was fleshed out very well. I had a really hard time understanding the plot at certain points because there were just so many POVs, but also there was this like time hop element where we're going back in the past, back to the future, the present. It was just a little bit messy to me. So I didn't rate this very highly and I definitely wouldn't recommend it, but it was a very short read. It was a little over 330-ish pages and it's a nice good floppy. So I'm glad I read it, but I don't think I'll be reading this one again. The next couple books that I read, I actually read quite a few on my Kindle this month, so I'll just be showing you guys the covers as we kind of talk through these. The next one that I read was Gilded by Marissa Meyer. This is actually the first book in a duology, and it's basically a dark fairy tale reimagining of Rumpelstiltskin. Hello, what's not to love about that? I ate this book up. I ate it so fast. It was so good. The writing was really imaginative. I loved the plot. We are following our main character, Serilda, who is basically been blessed / cursed by one of the gods of this like fairy tale world, and she has the gift of telling stories, and sometimes her stories end up coming true. So we're kind of following her throughout this tale, and there's this element of people from the dead and ghosts and demons that kind of like come out at certain points of time, usually on full moons, and kind of infiltrate the various towns that are in this fairy tale world. And there's this like element of a romantasy also involved with it, which is so interesting. There was a lot to love about this book. It had some spooky vibes, it had some thrilling vibes. Our main character is very likable. She's a really great character and she's a really likable heroine, and I really loved the first book so much. I ended up giving it 5 stars just because it was so good and it was really easy to read through. And I also read the second book this month as well, which is Cursed. The Cursed book follows Serilda as she kind of takes over residence in this haunted castle and becomes a ghost herself. And we're following her as she tries to break this curse over herself, over this town, over all of these other ghosts that are living within this castle that she forms relationships with. It's very different, I will say, and there were points in the second book that just didn't really click with me very much. It seemed a little bit slow at times. I really wanted more fleshing out in the romance aspect of the story. There is a little bit of like a romance element to this, but it's not very like forward. So I ended up giving it like a little over 4 stars, I believe. It was still really good, don't get me wrong, like I loved this duology, but the first book was a lot better in my opinion in terms of the story coming together a little bit more cohesive, and just some of the elements of the writing and prose I think were a little bit better in the first book. I also read another fantasy book, which was Fairy Tale by Stephen King. This was the largest book that I read this month. I want to say it's over 600 and so pages. I actually listened to this on Spotify, and I also read it on my Kindle. I did kind of like a back and forth pairing to this book. I really liked the speaker that was selected for Fairy Tale. He does a really good job with kind of differentiating between the different characters, and his voice is very engaging. So I found it very easy to listen to the book when I was doing chores and my day job. I will say, like, this book was a little bit slow at the beginning, and it starts to really pick up when our main character ends up finding this hidden world under a shed of this old man's house that he takes ownership of, and goes down into this unknown world and ends up having to rise to the occasion, be the bigger man, save an entire country. He's thrown into a various amount of fighting and having to save people, find a long lost princess. Like, it's got all of the elements of a fairy tale, hence why the book is named that way. And I totally binged like the last 30%, 40% of the book. I couldn't put it down. It really sucked me in, and I think I'm much more of a plot-driven reader than a character-driven reader, and I think that's probably why I finished it so quickly towards the end. The writing style was amazing. I've never read anything by Stephen King before, and I'm really glad that I gave this book a try. I'm not usually one that goes for horror books or anything too scary. I've heard good things about Fairy Tale and knew that it would be a really good book to kind of dip my toes into Stephen King without getting some of the creepy horror vibes that you normally get from him, if you will. From there, we moved on to a couple of thrillers that I finished for the month, and the first one I ended up renting from the library, which is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This book does have a little bit of a horror element to it. I did not know that going into reading this book, but it was still really, really good. We're following our main character, who's a washed-up actress, and she ends up going to her family lake house to kind of get away from some drama that she's caught herself with the paparazzi. So she kind of goes there to escape, and she's suffering from alcoholism. So the entire book, she's basically like drunk off her butt. So, you know, our main character, she's not the most likable, which is like pretty standard in terms of like thrillers. We're not really there to enjoy the characters very much. We're there to enjoy the thrill aspect and the plot, and this book had so much of that. We are immediately thrown into a scene at the very beginning where our main character, Casey, ends up saving her drowning neighbor, and they form a really close friendship. But things start to get a little bit weird as the story goes. That horror element that starts to seep out a little bit. Casey, our main character, she forms these relationships with some of the other neighbors, and they all kind of like spy on this house across the lake together. It's this wealthy couple, and Casey starts to think that the husband is out to kill the wife, who is basically now her friend. So definitely would recommend this book. There were quite a few plot twists in there that I didn't expect coming. I didn't guess them hardly at all. It was really, really good, and I totally binged the whole thing in like a couple days. I went to a coffee shop and finished it, and it was just what I needed. So yeah, definitely would recommend this book. It was fantastic. After I finished The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, I really wanted to read another thriller or a mystery, so I ended up picking up The Guest List by Lucy Foley. I have read another book by this author, The Paris Apartment, and I really, really enjoyed it, so I wanted to pick up another book by this author. The Guest List is more of a mystery as opposed to a pure thriller. We are following multiple POVs of a bunch of different wedding guests, the bride, the groom, the bridesmaid, the groomsmen, at this wedding that takes place in this remote island off the coast of Ireland. And the two people getting married, the bride and the groom, are very well known. They're more of like local celebrities, if you will. So that part of the book was very interesting to me. I will say that some of the book was a little bit redundant, and the reason for that being that a lot of the groomsmen in this book all went to the same public school together and formed this very unique bond. And it was really elaborated throughout the book on multiple occasions. It's brought up probably in almost every single chapter. And to me, that just felt a little bit unnecessary. I get that there are aspects of people's lives that they want to relive the glory days. And for some people, that happens to be high school. It just felt a little bit old after a while to me. I didn't really like that aspect of this book at all. And I I did end up guessing quite a few of the plot twists in this book, so it didn't really keep me engaged very much. However, I did really like this book. I thought it was entertaining, and it was something more that I wanted to pick up as like a palate cleanser to some of the other heavy reads that I picked up this month. So I still gave it like 3 stars. It was interesting, but it definitely like wasn't my favorite that I've picked up this month. From there, I ended up renting the book Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano. This was the book that my book club picked for our book of the month for January, and it was okay. I will say that this book has a lot of mental health issues that are like elaborated throughout, and we are following multiple sisters set in a 1980s, 1990s kind of setting in Chicago. And we're kind of following the various choices that they make and how that changes the dynamic of their family, the dynamic between sisters, relationships with men in their lives. And it's just kind of sad. I found myself really wanting to root for characters and be like, but you're so close. You are just so close to making a good decision. Like, I want to see you, like, take the initiative. I want to see you grow up a little bit more mature. But no. All of these characters were rather delusional. They're all very naive, and that could be due to the fact that all of them were under the age of like 20, 21 right at the beginning of the book, and then we follow them through adulthood at the very end. The ending is so depressing, you guys. Like, I just didn't really feel like connected to this book very much. Maybe because it's literary fiction, this might be a genre that I'm just not into. We'll have to see. I think I need to give a few more different types of literary fiction books a try before I make a total blanket statement over the entire genre. But, you know, if you guys have any recommendations in terms of literary fiction books that you really enjoy, definitely comment down below and let me know your thoughts, because this one just landed flat for me. From there, I ended up wanting to pick something a little bit different, so I went with Best Served Hot by Amanda Elliott. This is a classic enemies to lovers trope, and I love this one so much. I finished it in like a couple of days. It was so good. And I also read this one on my Kindle. Well, in Best Served Hot, we are following these 2 food critics set in New York City, and they totally hate each other. And the reason for that is because the girl is like a social media expert food critic, and the guy is from like a newspaper traditional type of food critic reviewer, and they really end up having this super heated argument in the middle of a food festival, and it goes completely viral. The main character, she like films the whole thing, puts it on her social media, and kind of thinking that in doing so she's gonna really take a stab at the guy and kind of show him like, haha, like I'm better than you. Well, it totally backfires because the newspaper company finds the argument and really believes that if the 2 of them could come together and go to various restaurants and review them as professionals, it could really enhance both of their like ratings and engagement on social media. So they end up agreeing to this and kind of forming this like pseudo alliance together, and it's absolutely hysterical, you guys. Like, they go to these restaurants to review, and they sit at like opposite ends of the room. They send each other like food that they know that the other person doesn't like to kind of like get back at them, and it's absolutely hilarious. I really enjoyed it. It was a very good slow burn and build up to the romance aspect as well, which I really appreciate. I feel like a lot of the enemies to lovers tropes right now are basically like, oh, we hate each other, and then like 2 chapters later they're like totally in love and can't like keep their hands off each other. This book is not like that. It has a very good pacing in terms of like a slow build up to the romance aspect, which I really appreciated. It felt a little bit more believable in that regards. Also, the whole like food critic review world was really interesting. I love watching cooking shows, and for that reason I just love books that kind of like incorporate this like food aspect into the writing, and I really loved it, so I definitely would recommend. The last book of the month that I read is The Housemaid's Secret by Freida McFadden. This is a continuation to the Housemaid series. I read the first one earlier this year, and I gave it 5 stars. It was so good. I could not guess any of the plot twists at all whatsoever. And the main character is more of a heroine that I think I could get behind. And we are following Millie in the second book, who's the same main character in the first book. And she's kind of like known as this lady who is like a cleaner, but she has a background for helping women that come out of abusive relationships. and making sure that they get away from their husbands that are like hurting them or abusing them. So we're kind of following her in the second book, and she ends up working for this very wealthy family that is in New York. They have this very big penthouse, but something is off about this family right from the get-go. The wife seems to be abused by the husband, and the husband seems to have some type of issue with the wife and controlling her. So Millie ends up stepping in and trying to help the situation, and that's when all chaos basically breaks loose. And there are so many good plot twists in this book that I didn't even see coming. I didn't guess them at all. And I finished this in a matter of days. I couldn't put it down, and I gave it 5 stars. It was so good, you guys. Like, I definitely would recommend any book by Freida McFadden, especially The Housemaid and The Housemaid's Secret. They are by far probably the best thrillers I've ever read. Well, that concludes our January reading wrap-up video, you guys. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, all of the YouTube things that you guys know how to do. And I will see you in the next one. Love you. Bye!